Sensation. Was the knight in shining armor in your movie? Put your lips on mine and love the aftertaste now. I'm a ghost, I called your name, you look right through me. You're the reason I'm alive. Debate. I've been trying to fix my pride, but that shit's broken. That shit's broken. I'm trying to hide it now you know it. That I'm at an all time. No, 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 no. I know nothing. But I know that I know nothing. I know, but no, no, no. Was the prototype like three stacks on that CD? An example of the perfect candidate now. All your girlfriends said that you don't want to see me. Though the reason that I just can't concentrate. Bitch, my pride, but that shit's broken. That shit's broken. Just surprised how you know it. that I'm at an all time. Trying to fix my pride, but that shit's broken. That shit's broken. I'm trying hard, now you know it. I'm at an all time low, 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 low. Oh, low, 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 low. Trying, I'm sorry.
What is the biggest problem you face as a college student?
Being stressed out about all the things that I have to manage and deal with.
Definitely time management.
For me, like writing has always been an issue. Like I journal a lot, and honestly, if someone were to
I just woke up from a dream where you and I had to say goodbye. And I don't know what it means, but since I survived, I realized wherever you go, that's where I'll find. Uh, Nobody's promised tomorrow. So I'm not quit. That's the last night. If the you just for a be next to me. Oh, oh, lost in the words that peace me. Do this anymore. You already told you need to. Wherever you go, transfer my problem. Nobody is promised to. So just from next to you, right next to you.
Mic check. Mic check. Mic check. 1, 2. Respected guests, ladies and gentlemen, I bring to you good morning greetings from the headquarters of the National Open University of Nigeria, the home of open and distance learning in Nigeria, and of course, by implication, in the entirety of West African sub-region. Welcome to the start of activities marking the 14th convocation ceremony of the National Open University of Nigeria, commencing today with Dr. Akinwumi Adeshina, CON. In a very short moment from now, the Vice Chancellor's procession will be filing in, and the moment they filed in, it is a signal for us to commence with proceedings right here. Of course, this is a prelude to what to expect tomorrow, which will be the convocation ceremony proper, taking place at the Convocation Square of the National Open University of Nigeria. So, respected guests, as it is common knowledge by now, the chairman of today's convocation lecture is no other but another consummate academician, Professor Atairu Jiga, who is the pro-chancellor and chairman of Council, Usman Danfodio University, Sokoto. That gentleman requires no introduction at all. And so, already the hall is pregnant with a marriage of convenience between the town and gown. You know, all academics seated, former vice chancellor of the university stepping in, immediate past vice chancellor, Professor Abdallah Uba Adamu. Sir, you're most welcome. Good to see you here again. Let me also seize this moment to recognize Professor Emeritus Godwin Sogolu. Good to see you around too. It is a wonderful moment to welcome the Pro-Chancellor and Chairman Council of the National Open University of Nigeria, Malam Isa Yuguda, CON, and the council members of the National Open University of Nigeria. It's a pleasure having you here today, sir. All right, the Vice Chancellor's procession is already filing in. At this moment, we want to crave your indulgence to please rise for the Vice Chancellor's procession. National anthem, which will be followed by the national NOUN anthem and the national prayer, please. The national prayer. O God of all creation, grant this our one request. Help us to build a nation where no man is oppressed. Thank you. Please be seated. May I now invite the registrar, who will subsequently invite the Vice Chancellor to take charge of proceedings.
Good morning. Please, nobody should cross the front of the maze, please. Please. Mr. Vice Chancellor, sir, may I invite you to declare the convocation lecture open and as well introduce our special guests. May I invite you to declare the convocation lecture open and as well introduce our special guests.
My privilege. Good morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's my individual guest this morning to welcome you all to this very important ceremony of the National Open University of Nigeria, the first activity for the 14th convocation ceremony. The speaker of today is no less a person and is president and chairman of the African Development Bank Group, Dr. Akinwumi Adesina. You are welcome to the National Open University of Nigeria. I wish to welcome to the National Open University of Nigeria our chairman of today. Our chairman of today needs no introduction, but I will still introduce him. We know our chairman for the different roles he had been privileged to play in the education and political affairs of our country. We knew our chairman first as ASU National President. We later knew our chairman as Vice Chancellor, Bayero University, Kano. Thereafter, he busted into our national consciousness when he, as the chairman of INEC, taught us that institutions are only as strong as the person manning such institutions, and not the other way. But before his role at INEC, our chairman was a professor of political science at the Bayero University, Kano, where he was involved in various academic and policy-oriented discourse, with a focus of his research being on electoral politics. A former pro-chancellor of the University of Jos, is presently the pro-chancellor of Usman Odanfodio University, Sokoto, and special advisor and coordinator of the presidential livestock reform. Our chairman is a man well known as a no-nonsense person. He is well respected for his integrity, leadership, and commitment to the Nigerian cause. Professor Atahiru Jega, OFR, is our chairman today. I also want to welcome the Pro-Chancellor of the National Open University of Nigeria in the person of His Excellency, who was and is a living testimony to public service. The Pro-Chancellor is Malam Isa Yuguda, a one-time Minister of Aviation, a one-time Minister of Transport, a two-time Executive Governor of Bauchi State, a one-time MD of NOUN Merchant Bank, a one-time MD of Savannah Bank. Please welcome our Pro-Chancellor, His Excellency Malam Isa Yuguda. I also want to welcome the former Vice Chancellors of the National Open University of Nigeria who are here present. I have the person who got fortuitously placed on his hand and head to resuscitate this university in the person of Professor Olugbemiro Jegeden. You are welcome, sir. I also have seated here my immediate successor, a man we call a double professor, Professor Abdallah Uba Adamu. You are welcome, sir. I recognize the principal vice chancellors of the National Open University of Nigeria, the deputy vice chancellors, academic, administration, technology, and research. I recognize the registrar of the National Open University of Nigeria. I recognize the bossa, Malam Nasiru Marafa, and I recognize the university librarian, Dr. Angela Pala. It's also my pleasure to welcome to our midst. It's also my pleasure to welcome to our midst the council member of the National Open University of Nigeria. You are here seated behind our Pro-Chancellor. You are hereby welcome, sir. I've just been informed that in this audience, we have the Honorable Minister of Youth Development. I'll be trying to locate him. Oh, thank you very much. Well being represented. Thank you very much. You are all welcome. Distinguished invited guests, I also have in our midst a longtime friend who is here representing the Nigerian Institute of Architects, Architect Mobolaji Adeni, Fellow of the Nigerian Institute of Architects. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we have a number of people that are here represented, and I shall duly recognize them as time goes on. But permit me, therefore, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, that before I invite the chairman of the occasion to give an opening remarks, may I recognize the other part of the team, as we now call her, the wife to the convocation lecturer, Dr. Akim Adesina, in the person of Mrs. Yemisi Adesina. You are welcome to our university. Thank you very much. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to now invite the chairman of this occasion, as I hereby declare the 14th convocation lecture open. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Our host, the Vice Chancellor of the National Open University, Abuja, Professor Olufemi Peters, the Pro-Chancellor and Chairman of Council of this university, members of council, principal officers of the university, members of Senate, staff, and students of the university, our indefatigable guest lecturer, President of the African Development Bank Group, Dr. Akinwumi Adesina, CON, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I would like to, first of all, at the outset, express my sincere thanks and appreciation to the Vice Chancellor of this great university for honoring me with the invitation to this convocation lecture as the chairman of the occasion. I accept it wholeheartedly and unreservedly as an academic who knows the significance of convocation lectures and convocation ceremonies, and also in acknowledgement of the excellent choice of both the speaker and the chosen theme for today's lecture. So as chairman, I join the Vice Chancellor in welcoming all of you gathered here today for this convocation lecture, an important aspect of the 14th convocation ceremonies of this great university. As we are all no doubt aware, convocation is a formal gathering in a university to mark an important milestone. especially the graduation of students who have been found worthy in learning and in character. After 4 or 5 years of course of study in a tertiary institution, especially in a university. Now, anytime we mention found worthy in learning and in character, people tend to wonder whether learning and character necessarily go together. Well, they do not. One can have learning and even be considered learned, as lawyers refer to, but with no good character, I'm sorry to say. Also, one can be certificated without learning anything or learning much, and yet have good character. But the expectation is that university graduates are positioned for the ideal of having both learning and character. Now, if this ideal has been approximated in Nigerian universities in the past, it now remains a mere aspiration. In most cases, regrettably, our universities are certificating illiterates and awarding degrees in many cases to persons with unworthy character. Why and how is this so? I can only say that there are complicated reasons and complex explanations, and that will be a subject or a topic for another lecture. Perhaps someday you may call me to be the convocation lecturer, and I will speak on these issues. But I would like to say that the purpose of a convocation lecture is to inspire and motivate students, faculty, and staff to celebrate milestones and or address important issues or themes relevant to the academic community or to society at large. The convocation lecture is designed to be thought-provoking and stimulating in addressing the important issues or themes chosen, and is also to be delivered by a distinguished speaker, often an expert or prominent figure in the academia or in industry. Ladies and gentlemen, I venture to say, even before the lecture begins, that the purpose has been substantially achieved, in the sense that the person who has been chosen and also the excellent theme or thematic issue to be discussed, which is advancing Africa's positioning within global development and geopolitical dynamics. And you will agree with me that this, no doubt, promises to be stimulating, inspiring, and thought-provoking. The speaker, of course, is one of the most indomitable, highly respected achievers, hardworking, and prominent global citizens, Dr. Akinwumi A. Adesina, CON. President, African Development Bank. We will hear more about his resume and outstanding profile when he is formally introduced before he delivers his lecture. But let me just say that Dr. Adesina, my dear brother, is an outstanding Nigerian who has been doing our country and us as Nigerians and Africans very proud. And he has done this not just nationally, when he was Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development in Nigeria, but also internationally, for especially his accomplishments at the African Development Bank Group, in conceiving, directing, and executing great, even profound programs and projects, and advancing good causes on all aspects of African development with tremendous value additions to human development. He is certainly among the few who have earned our country and continent respectability in ways and manners by which he has handled his responsibilities with passion, with love, with dignity, with intelligence, with courage, with empathy, with steadfastness, with selflessness, and with patriotic and Africanist fervor. Few people, I can say, have been entrusted with such enormous responsibilities and have done so consistently and so commendably well. His lecture is on an apt thematic issue with which he has been engaged, indeed on a driver's seat for a decade. The struggle to position Africa appropriately, prominently, and justly within beneficial, people-oriented global development, notwithstanding the obnoxious and distressing, if not depressing, geopolitical dynamics afflicting the world today, which have assigned little, if any, roles and benefits to Africa, which invest in African human capital development, and which have rather striven to make Africa the open field of plunder of globally cherished resources, and at the same time, turning Africa into a dumping ground of that which is mostly undesirable, from arms and ammunition that engender devastating conflicts, to diseases, to chemical, even nuclear wastes. As an intellectual in the driver's seat of confronting and struggling against these geopolitical dynamics, Dr. Adesina must have a lot of insights and experiences to, perhaps even if diplomatically, share with us, to inspire us, to provoke our thinking, and perhaps even better still, to provoke us to collectively understand the existential dimensions of the issues for all Africans and to engage with these issues appropriately. Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I wouldn't want to preempt the lecture or the lecturer. So once again, I join in welcoming you to this convocation lecture by this iconic Nigerian and African, and I invite you to sit comfortably and savor what I call the products of Dr. Adesina's ideas emanating from and enriched by his experiences, and to literally drink from his fountain of knowledge. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Another round of applause, please. Another round of applause, please. Before I invite the competition of the university orator for the citation of the convocation lecturer, I need to quickly make some introduction. We have some guests here who I think I should quickly introduce to us. We have the Vice President of the African Development Bank, Professor Ken Urama. Please, can you please stand up for recognition, please? The Vice President, yes, we have the Director General, Dr. Abdul Kamara. You're welcome, sir. We have the Senior Special Advisor to the President of the African Development Bank, Professor Yebanji Oyelaron. You are welcome, sir. And we have some friends of the university. We have Dr. Joseph Donoli of the NDIC. You please stand up, sir. We have Professor Emmanuel Oyedepe, the retired film professor from Abu. Professor Oyedepe, you are welcome, sir. So also I have the representative of the Controller General of Nigerian Correctional Service, in the person of Mr. Amoron Olariwaju. Mr. Olariwaju, sir, representing the Consular General of Nigerian Correctional Center. So I have the honor to invite University Orator, Professor Christine Ayofulwe, to come and read the citation of the Convocation lecturer, please.
The chair of the occasion, Professor Atairu Jega, the Vice Chancellor, National Open University of Nigeria, the principal officers and members of Senate here present, and the Chancellor and Chairman of the Governing Council, and other members of the University Governing Council. Permit me, Chair, sir, to proceed on the already established protocol. Vice Chancellor, sir, our guest speaker, Dr. Akinwumi A. Adesina, CON-CGH, is the 8th elected president. I think you will need to rise, sir. Thank you. Our guest speaker, Dr. Akinwumi A. Adesina, CON-CGH, is the 8th elected president and chairman of the boards of directors of the African Development Bank Group. A distinguished development economist and Pan-Africanist with over 30 years of international experience, Dr. Adesina exemplifies visionary leadership and transformative impact. Dr. Adesina graduated with first-class honors in agricultural economics in 1981 from the University of Ife, now Obafemi Awolowo University, Nigeria, becoming the first in the institution's history to achieve this distinction in agricultural economics. He earned a master's degree in 1985 and a PhD in agricultural economics in 1988 from Purdue University in the United States, where his groundbreaking research earned him the Outstanding PhD Thesis Award. Dr. Akinwumi Adesina served as Nigeria's Minister of Agriculture from 2010 to 2015, implementing bold reforms that transformed the agricultural sector. During his tenure, Nigeria ended decades-long corruption in the fertilizer sector by developing and implementing an innovative electronic wallet system, which directly provided 15 million farmers with subsidized inputs via mobile technology. His reforms attracted $5.6 billion in private sector investments, increased food production by 21 million metric tons, and empowered youth through agribusiness initiatives. Prior to his ministerial role, Dr. Adesina held leadership positions in several international agricultural organizations, including Vice President for Policy and Partnerships with the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, AGRA, key roles at the Rockefeller Foundation, the West Africa Rice Development Association, WADA, the International Institute for Tropical Agriculture, IITA, and the International Crops Research Institute for the Semi-Arid Tropics, INCRISAT, contributing significantly to agricultural development across Africa. Elected president of the African Development Bank in 2015 and re-elected in 2020, Dr. Adesina's visionary leadership has transformed the bank into a globally recognized institution and a leader in financial innovation, with its general capital increasing from $93 billion to $318 billion. He spearheaded the High Five strategy to address Africa's critical challenges, namely Light Up and Power Africa, Feed Africa, Industrialize Africa, Integrate Africa, and improve the quality of life of Africans. These initiatives have impacted the lives of over 500 million Africans. He also launched the Africa Investment Forum, AIF, mobilizing over 200 billion US dollars to accelerate Africa's economic development. Under Dr. Adesina's leadership, the African Development Bank has made remarkable and transformative investments in education and skills development, equipping African youth with industry-driven skills and technologies to enhance job creation, workforce competitiveness, and equal opportunities. These efforts have strengthened the resilience, inclusiveness, and competitiveness of education systems across the continent. Since 2015, when Dr. Adesina was elected president, the African Development Bank has invested 5.2 billion US dollars in Nigeria and mobilized an additional 5.2 billion US dollars in co-financing, bringing the total to 10.4 billion US dollars in support of 52 projects in the country. Notable initiatives include the Special Agro-Industrial Processing Zones, SPAZ, the Digital and Creative Enterprises Program, IDICE, and the Nigerian Youth Entrepreneurship Investment Bank, all of which are critical to empowering youth and fostering economic growth. A prolific writer, Dr. Adesina has authored over 70 scholarly publications on policy, agricultural development, and Africa development issues. His biography, Against All Odds, published in 2014, chronicles his transformative journey in agriculture, development economics, leadership, making it an essential resource for scholars and future leaders. A distinguished Africanist visiting scholar at Cornell University in the US, Dr. Adesina has served as president of the African Association of Agricultural Economists, as well as on the editorial board of several academic journals, including the International Journal of Agricultural Economics. Dr. Akinwunmi Adesina is a highly sought-after keynote speaker, renowned for his inspirational and engaging presentation style. He has delivered keynote addresses at numerous prestigious national and international events, earning widespread recognition for his ability to captivate his audience. Dr. Adesina's exceptional contributions have earned him global recognitions and numerous awards, including the World Food Prize in 2017, the Sunak Peace Prize in 2019, the Forbes Africa Person of the Year in 2013 and 2019, respectively, and the CNBC African Forbes Africa's African of the Decade in 2024. He holds honorary doctorates from multiple prestigious institutions worldwide and national honors from 9 African countries, including Nigeria's Commander of the Order of the Niger, CON. He was recently conferred with the Chief of the Order of the Golden Heart, CGH, the highest honor, national honor, and distinction of Kenya, reserved for presidents and heads of state. Dedicated to combating hunger and empowering African youth in agriculture, Dr. Adesina established the World Hunger Fighters Foundation. Using his World Food Prize Award money, the foundation supports innovators through initiatives like the Borlaug Adesina Fellowship, nurturing future leaders in agribusiness and agricultural research to drive sustainable food security across Africa. Vice Chancellor, sir, and the chair of this occasion, our convocation lecturer today embodies unparalleled intellectual excellence and transformative leadership. Renowned globally for his contributions to agriculture, development economics, research, and banking, Dr. Adesina is eminently suited to address the theme of the 14th Convocation lecture, titled Advancing Africa's Positioning Within Global Development and Political Dynamics. It is my distinctive honor to therefore present our esteemed guest speaker. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Akinwunmi A. Adesina, CON, CGH, President of the African Development Bank Group, to deliver the 14th convocation lecture of the National Open University of Nigeria. Thank you.
Please kindly be seated. You know, before I start all the protocols, I need to give a full disclosure. And isn't she wonderful, Professor Yetunde Ofolue, for the citation that she gave? Thank you very much, University Orator. But I want to say she's also the junior sister of my wife. And so when you have her give such kind of wonderful things about my citation, the only thing she has to say that I married the best woman in the world, her senior sister, who is here with me today. Thank you very much. Chairman of the occasion, the former Vice Chancellor of Bayero University, Kano, and my dear brother, Professor Atahiru Jega. You are also the former head of ASU. And when we were in university, we knew exactly what that was. Aluta Continua. But then you decided to calm down. And then you became the chairman of the Independent National Electoral Commission. And you did a brilliant job in that. Bringing transparency, sense of purpose, patriotism to the work, and importantly, safeguarding the role of institutions. Thank you very much, Prof. And now you're working on the presidential advisor to President Tinubu on livestock reforms, and you and I can have that conversation at some time. And thank you very much for your kind words also at the beginning. Mr. Vice Chancellor, sir, Professor Femi Peters, thank you for inviting me to come and give this convocation lecture. I appointed him when I was Minister of Agriculture as the Director General of the National Institute for Store Products. And he was a phenomenal scientist who developed and transformed that institution. And I'm not surprised that you are able to be selected to become the Vice Chancellor of this wonderful university. I know you as somebody with high professionalism, passion, dedication, creativity, innovativeness, and of course, transparency in what you do. Your Excellency, my dear brother, Malam Isa Yuguda, the Pro-Chancellor, in fact, when they were introducing you, 2 times this, 2 times that, 2 times that, 1 that, The only thing is that you are always my friend, so that one is not going to change. Pro-Chancellor and Chairman of the Governing Council, National Open University of Nigeria, council members that are here present, the former chancellors, vice chancellors of the National Open University, distinguished Professor Jegede that is here, and Professor Adamu. I must also give another full disclosure, because when I finished my National Youth Service, I finished from University of Ife. At that time, they said all the students that graduated in first-class honors in Nigeria should be taken to a place called the National Open University of Nigeria that was then about to be created. We were going to be sent abroad to go and get our PhDs and come back and teach there. Of course, I actually didn't do that. That's why I'm not here lecturing here. But I'm glad I finally came back to where I was supposed to be. The principal officers of the university, the deputy vice chancellors, registrar, bursar, university librarians, the graduating students from the University of NOUN, the staff and students of the National Open University, friends of the Nigerian National Open University of Nigeria, my darling wife, Grace Yemisi, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I wish to thank Vice Chancellor Professor, make sure this is properly, Vice Chancellor Professor Olufemi Peters and the University Senate for the great honor of receiving an honorary doctorate from the National Open University of Nigeria, NOUN. And I'm delighted to be here today with my dear wife, Grace. And as I was being introduced, I walked in one of the most incredible fellows I've ever worked with, architect Sonny Echonu. He was my federal permanent secretary when I was minister. And I can tell you, without any doubt at all, that's the best permanent secretary that we had in the country. And now I understand you're in charge of TED Fund. So hopefully the money moves around into this particular place more. So thanks for inviting him. I'll encourage him to lose some money here before he leaves. I have great admiration for NOUN for 3 reasons. First, NOUN is the largest open university in Africa. And just think of its scale. It offers courses, 2,000 courses, and has over 600,000 students enrolled. Second, NOUN is the second largest open university in the world, period. That means NOUN gets a gold medal in Africa, a silver medal in the world for its excellent work on open learning. There is no other institution in Nigeria's history that has ever achieved such an incredible standing. You make Nigeria exceptionally proud, and you make Africa proud too. Congratulations to you all. With your incredible achievements, NOUN should receive, I believe, at least 3 times the current budget from the federal government of Nigeria to continue to expand access to education for all. Third, NOUN produced your most famous alumni, former President Olusegun Obasanjo, and a father to me, former President of Federal Republic of Nigeria. This is also another claim to fame that you have at home. In fact, before coming here, I did tell him I was going to come and give a lecture here, and I told them that I will ask how his grades were here, confidentially. Of course, I am also proud of NOUN for family reasons. Well, as I told you, my wife's younger sister is a professor at NOUN, Professor Yetunde Ofolue. So you can understand when I say I love NOUN for life. I have delivered convocation lectures all over the world, but this is the first time that I will be addressing a student population of 600,000. Wow, that is the equivalent of speaking to 10-packed FIFA World Cup stadiums, each with a capacity of 60,000 required to host quarterfinals of the FIFA World Cup or semifinals. Well, thanks to your digital online platforms, that's possible, and many of them are watching today. Nothing is more important than education. My late father, Roland F. Adeshina, sacrificed all to send my siblings and I to school. He used to tell us that education is the greatest leveler in society. Access to great education, he affirmed, will allow the children of the poor to reach and exceed the pinnacles reserved only for the children of the rich and the privileged in society. Well, here I am today for my humble beginnings, the product of his great sacrifice and investment. And therefore, dedicate the honorary doctorate that will be conferred on me tomorrow to my late beloved father, mentor, friend, and benefactor, my dad, Roland Folorunso Adeshina, because without him, I will not be here today. That is why the work you do here is so important, expanding access to education for everyone and the opportunity for lifelong learning, enabling hundreds of thousands to retool, to reskill, and to position themselves for today's rapidly changing world with technological innovations moving at the speed of light, or should I say the speed of thought. The title of my lecture today is on that rapidly changing world, advancing Africa's positioning within global development and geopolitical dynamics. Just so that you know, I did we printed several copies of this lecture. So you are going to get it at the end, just bringing them in. So please be sure that you will get copies of my lecture. From the ongoing wars in Ukraine and Russia to conflicts in the Middle East, geopolitical risks are rising with implications for global peace and stability. New trends of nationalism are challenging multilateralism as we have always known it. Tariff wars between some of the largest economies in the world, the United States, Canada, China, India, and Mexico, risk pulling the global economy downwards, with some predicting another possible global recession. The global financial system has been unable to effectively address the challenges facing Africa, especially on matters of debt, climate change, and access to greater financing. Restrictive immigration policies pose new challenges for labor mobility and employment, a particular challenge for Africa's rapidly growing youth population. The recent dismantling of the official development aid agency in the United States and similar aid measures, anti-aid measures, in other parts of Europe means that the old development models that Africa has always relied on will no longer work. And how should Africa navigate these ominous trends? In this lecture, I will discuss the rapidly changing global landscape for development aid and implications for Africa, the challenges Africa faced during the COVID-19 pandemic, and the lessons for development approaches. The inadequacy of the global financial architecture to support Africa to cope with external shocks and how this should be addressed. The challenges of global migration restrictions and how this should influence Africa's countries' policies and programs to create jobs for the youth and reverse the brain drain. The global rush for Africa's critical minerals and how the continent should address this so it is not marginalized. The rising insecurity in Africa and the need for Africa-driven solutions to rebuild areas devastated by conflicts. The high and rising cost of accessing capital by Africa in the global financial markets and how to address risks that elevate its borrowing costs and debt service costs. The global dynamics in tackling climate change and its effects on Africa, the need for better value Africa's natural capital assets to boost its wealth, and of course, the recent tariff wars and implications for Africa. First, let me start with the issue of aid and its implications for Africa. Of great concern for many African countries is a rapid decline in development aid. There is no doubt that development aid plays a significant role for many economies in Africa, especially providing much needed support for vulnerable populations that deal with shocks. However, despite its benefits, aid is not the way to develop. Indeed, no nation has ever developed based on aid. Let's cast our minds back to the challenge of COVID-19. I was particularly shocked at the time in 2020 that Africa did not have basic things, vaccines, basic medical supplies, such as gloves, sanitizers, and life-saving oxygen. While aid was provided by some countries, it came in trickles, way too little and too late for millions of people. A stark economic divergence soon emerged. While developed economies spent $19 trillion in fiscal stimulus programs, approximately that is about 19% of the global GDP, Africa spent a minuscule $89 billion. While Africa was frantically looking for its population to have access to just one dose of the vaccines, populations in developed countries were having second, third, fourth booster doses and more. I remember saying at the time that Africa must not outsource the health security of its 1.4 billion people to the generosity and benevolence of others. What if the others are not generous? What if they are not benevolent? But Africa survived COVID-19. We rose to the challenge and found solutions as doctors and medical staff from rural to urban areas put their lives at risk to save others, including the remarkable Dr. Adadevo, right here at home in Nigeria during the Ebola virus pandemic. May her sweet soul rest in peace. So we were down, and the only way to go was up. Within 3 weeks of the breakout of COVID-19, as fiscal pressures mounted on African countries, the African Development Bank moved swiftly and launched a $3 billion COVID-19 social bond on the global capital market, the largest ever in world history. The African Development Bank also launched a $10 billion COVID-19 emergency facility to support African countries. To make sure that Africa is never left vulnerable again, never again, and to ensure its health security, the African Development Bank, under my leadership, launched immediately a $3 billion program to build Africa's health infrastructure, from primary healthcare to secondary healthcare and to tertiary healthcare infrastructure, to ensure that Africa can produce its own vaccines and save itself from the ridicule of begging around the world, and move away from a situation where we import over 80% of our medicines and produce only 1% of our vaccines. The African Development Bank launched, again, a $3 billion Africa Pharmaceutical Action Plan to build the manufacturing capacity of local African pharmaceutical companies. Our goal is simple: achieve sovereignty for Africa in producing its own medicines and vaccines. I'm somebody who believes that you can never develop by begging. You have to develop by the discipline of investment, and you cannot develop unless you have a sense of pride. We launched as well the Africa Pharmaceutical Technology Foundation to help Africa to navigate the complex world of intellectual property rights, and makes it impossible for many African pharmaceutical companies to access technologies, active pharmaceutical ingredients, and to process them and processes for manufacturing vaccines. Today, I am glad to let you know, Africa has emerged with better capacity to manufacture more of its own vaccines, from Egypt to South Africa, Kenya, Senegal, Rwanda, Algeria, and Tunisia, and we are working as well with Nigeria. Africa navigated the complexity of the global development and geopolitical dynamics, survived and thrived. In the process, we learned a number of profound lessons. Africa must wean itself from aid dependency syndromes. Africa must be 100% self-sufficient in the manufacturing of vaccines and medicines. In the world where it is becoming increasingly difficult to know allies, or where long-term allies suddenly shift their priorities, there is no substitute for self-reliance. Africa must therefore treat security, health security, just like we treat national defense. We must ramp up public and private sector financing for research and development. Our universities must be supported very strongly to have world-class medical sciences facilities that will allow our countries to drive cutting-edge innovations in medicine and pharmaceutical sciences. We must then connect them to fuel the growth of medical and pharmaceutical industries. That is the only way we will secure Africa against any future health shocks. That way, Africa will develop with pride. Second, let me address the issue of how global contingent financing framework shortchanges Africa. African countries face limited access to global contingent financing to respond to multiple shocks. To respond to the multiple challenges of COVID-19 pandemic, the International Monetary Fund issues $650 billion of what they call special drawing rights, or SDRs. These SDRs are simply reserve assets held by countries to address balance of payment deficits where there are fiscal challenges. However, out of the $650 billion of SDRs issued, Africa received only $33 billion. That is 4.5% for a population of 1.4 billion people. Yet African countries have the greatest need and the least resources to meet the costs imposed on the economies that arose from the health pandemic-driven economic lockdowns. The African Development Bank, again, led the global effort and called for a rechanneling of those SDRs from developed countries that have them but do not need them towards African countries. Specifically, the African Union called for the rechanneling of the SDRs to Africa through the African Development Bank. That's because the African Development Bank is a globally rated AAA institution. In fact, the only AAA rated financial institution on the whole continent, and therefore we can use our leveraging power. To make this possible within the legally acceptable rules for the International Monetary Fund, the African Development Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank developed a framework that will allow the rechanneling while ensuring that its SDRs maintain their reserve asset status and that countries that do the rechanneling can get their SDRs back when they need them. It was a major effort. In a landmark decision, the board of the International Monetary Fund approved this landmark framework that we developed for rechanneling SDRs to multilateral development banks, as per the framework that we developed from the African Development Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank. Now, what is particularly attractive in this framework, in a world where you have limited resources, is that every dollar of the SDRs that are actually rechanneled to multilateral development banks like us will be leveraged 8 times. It tells you how you use money. So a $50 billion rechanneling will deliver $150 billion to $200 billion of new financing for Africa at zero cost to taxpayers anywhere in the world. In today's global context, therefore, of declining aid, the rechanneling of the SDRs, or the special drawing rights, is the most impactful way to support development for African countries at zero cost to taxpayers in developed countries that are rich in SDRs. To further expand the financing resources for African countries, the African Development Fund, we have a fund that's called the African Development Fund, which is the concessional arm of the African Development Bank. We have accumulated more than a lot of equity in that over the years. Again, we innovated and we said, why don't we just use the equity we have accumulated over the years to go to the capital markets and leverage more resources for these countries? We came up with a very innovative model that will now allow us to raise an additional $27 billion in long-time financing from the capital markets for Africa's low-income countries. The African Development Bank, now we are in our process of our replenishing of that fund, and we think that being able to mobilize an additional $27 billion will change the fortunes of many countries and give them fiscal space that they need to develop. Third, let me address the issue of global migration and bring this down to that of students in the university. Address the issue of global migration restrictions and implications for African countries. A hot button issue for political leaders around the world especially in the UK, across Europe and the United States, is immigration, especially illegal immigration. Historically, migration allows the mobility of people, skills, and talent that have spoiled the economies of several developed countries. But as economies slow down and public finances become more challenged, it is common to have anti-immigrant sentiments. One only needs to see the rising waves of illegal immigrants in African countries on the Mediterranean. Imagine how those images influence the public debate in the receiving nations. That's because illegal migration poses huge fiscal burdens and put pressure on public financing and infrastructure, including schools, hospitals, jobs, and social protection systems. The rising anti-immigration wave has implications for Africa. By 2050, 1 in 4 people in the world will be African. As the New York Times put it, the world is becoming increasingly African. Some people worry about that. I don't. Some people think we should be reducing our population. I don't. Because why is China not reducing its population? Why is India not reducing its population? In today's world where you have tariffs, and I'll talk about it in a moment, you need to grow your economy through domestic consumption. It's a big part of your GDP. Your population only becomes a problem when you're not training them. If you actually train them and you have good middle class that rises up, guess what? They buy every single thing that you produce. They stabilize your market. And so please, let's not buy into all those theories that say that we should be worried. We should be worried only when we don't turn the population, which is a demographic asset, into an economic asset. Africa's population will rise from 1.4 billion people today to 2.4 billion by 2050, with over 75% of the population aged less than 35 years old. Africa will also account for the world's largest growing youth population, with a working age population expected to grow by 450 million, or close to 70% by 2025, this year. But with appropriate skills, they will form the labor force for the global industries, even as several developed countries are facing rapidly aging population. Well, let's be clear. Just because the world is becoming more African does not mean the rest of the world must bear the burden of the explosive population growth in Africa. Africa's demographic growth must not become a global negative externality. Africa cannot blame others for not taking in its rising migrant population. Africa must create the right environment for its own youth to thrive, right here on the continent. These must start with providing Africa's youth with globally competitive quality education. Now, I don't believe that the future of Africa's youth lies in the United States. I don't believe that it lies in Europe. I don't believe that it lies in Asia or any part of the world. It must lie in an Africa growing well, growing inclusively, and able to actually support private sector to generate quality jobs for the young people. The so-called things you call jackpot thing. If you jackpot there, you have to jackpot back. Because when the economies grow and thrive, people don't have to leave. Why do you want to leave? You know, actually, it's good to work at home. You can eat your amala. You can do all kinds of things that you can't do over there. So it's good to have that. Despite gains that we have made over time, however, majority of Africa's youth still fall behind on education. I'm speaking at a university. For the sake of comparison, let's look at Japan and Africa. While 98.9% of the youth in Japan have completed secondary education, only 43% of the youth in Africa complete secondary school education. In terms of higher education, the gap is even starker. While 60% of the youth in Japan are pursuing higher education, only 10% of Africa's youth enrolled in higher education. Among those pursuing higher education, African youth are less enrolled in educational fields that are dominating the world. For example, while 30% of Japanese youth in the universities pursue science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, less than 25% of African students in the universities actually are in those fields. The implication are as follows. It puts Africa behind in terms of preparedness for the fourth industrial revolution, especially in the fields such as artificial intelligence, robotics, automation, cloud computing, while that are all revolutionizing the world. To change this, the African Development Bank is working with the African Union to establish a $300 million African Education, Science, and Technology Innovation Fund. The bank has also supported several universities of science and technology to address this gap. The challenge facing many youths, a lot more in Africa, is a mismatch between the education they receive and the skills they need for the labor market. We must prepare our young population for the rapidly changing world of the digital economy through upskilling in digital skills. And that is why the African Development Bank's program on Skills and Employability Action Plan is being implemented to bridge the skills gap and address skills mismatches, quality, and relevance. And as of 2024, March, the bank approved close to $682 million for projects to upscale skills for the youth. The bank plans to provide an additional financing of $809 million by this year in support of projects for skills and employability of youth in Africa. Across Africa, the upgrading of digital skills and education is being fast-tracked by the youth themselves with access to smartphones. This includes online micro-credentials in different fields with platforms such as Coursera. For example, Coursera estimates that over 2/3 of the learners from Africa access their education for skills upgrade via smartphones and tablets, which says it's the highest level in the world. That's why the African Development Bank is supporting what we call Coding for Employment, a program we established to have 130 centers of excellence across Africa, together with the Microsoft philanthropies. We have so far provided digital skills for over 1 million youth across the continent. A big challenge, of course, facing the youth in Africa is the lack of employment opportunities. While 15 million youth enter the labor market each year, there are only 3 million jobs available, leaving an annual unemployment rate gap of 12 million. With increasingly limited employment opportunities in the public sector, the focus needs to shift from the youth becoming job seekers to the youth becoming job creators. The key to solving unemployment is entrepreneurship. Africa is today experiencing an entrepreneurship boom, with 22% of its working age population starting a business, the highest rate in the world, according to the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor 2020. The leading areas of focus for entrepreneurship are in the areas of agriculture, retail, services, and technology. The future, indeed, is very bright for innovative young entrepreneurs in Africa. This is being driven by the rapid expansion of the digital economy, which will add $180 billion to Africa's GDP by this year, and $712 billion by 2050. Africa's startup ecosystem is taking advantage of this digital economy with more than 600 active startup hubs on the continent, including right here in Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, and Egypt. They become the tech centers in Africa, driven by young entrepreneurs in health tech, agri-tech, and e-commerce. And I'm very proud of all these young guys in Nigeria. I should give it up to them because these guys, they run from OPay. You look at all of this, Andela, all of those companies. These are young people that are going to be changing the future of this country. This rapid growth is being spurred, of course, by venture capital funds. For example, according to Disrupt Africa, African tech startups raised over $5 billion in 2022. This has doubled the financing raised in 2020. The African fintech industry has become especially attractive for investors. With over 57% of Africa's population still unbanked, fintech startups are rapidly innovating to provide financial services to the underserved segment and the rapidly growing population. The fintech market in Africa was valued at $13 billion in 2023. Its size will grow to $20 to $23 billion by 2028. It will grow to $150 billion by 2040. Then it will grow to $200 billion by 2050. Now, this exponential growth is also being driven by faster internet penetration and an equally rapid spread of mobile phones, especially smartphones, which are expected to have 67% penetration by 2025. The increased connectivity provides a fertile ground for tech startups in areas such as e-commerce, fintech, and digital services. To further boost the businesses of young Africans in Africa, the African Development Bank is supporting several initiatives. We are establishing what is called Youth Entrepreneurship Investment Banks. And let me be clear on this issue. As I move around as president of the bank, everywhere I go, I'm told, because of the high level of youth unemployment, well, what are you doing? They say we have youth empowerment programs. We don't know what those things mean because I've hardly been met by any young person that's told me that they've been empowered. And so maybe those people that are doing those things are empowering themselves. The young people don't need the so-called empowerment. They have ideas, they have creativity, they have innovation. They want to turn those things into great businesses. And so what they need is not some little monies being thrown at them as if they are begging. They're not begging. We should put our capital at risk behind them and make sure we turn that demographic asset into our biggest economic dividend. And that is why here at home in Nigeria, we have supported. I was just this morning with Minister Wale doing the coordinating minister of the economy. We provided $100 million for the establishment of what's called the Nigerian Youth Entrepreneurship Investment Bank. That will actually deploy $2 billion to support 38,000 of these young businesses in Nigeria. Just imagine what that will be. Bill Gates is a friend of mine. Do you think Bill Gates would be who Bill Gates is today? Or Zuckerberg, if they didn't have financial capital systems around them for their ideas to thrive? No. Mr. Vice Chancellor, you produce a lot of students. Professor Yaga, you produce so many students over time. But how do we make sure that when you see a young person, what you're looking at is not risk? Because when you go to a bank, they look at you and say, you're a young person. How old are you? You say, I'm 21 years old. What do you need? I need a loan. They say, well, how many houses do you have? For your collateral? And how much taxes have you paid in the last 20 years? For me to show that you have the revenue to be able to pay it back. No, the young people are not risks. They are our assets. We are the ones that have to de-risk the financial institutions to give them the resources they need to thrive. Japan is having a declining population. Germany is having a declining population, aging population. We are having a rapidly increasing youth population. But that will become a problem unless we are able to put capital systems around them to thrive. And that is why I really believe that this Youth Entrepreneurship Investment Bank, they are brand new financial institutions, by the way. Because if the commercial banks could do it, how come they've not done it? How come we have people jackpotting all over the place? When in fact, we can actually put capital at risk behind them to turn their ideas to great businesses. If they don't, who will pay the taxes in the future? They are the ones that will pay it. And so therefore, I maintain the issue, it's not about managing young people. The issue, it's about unleashing their potential. The greatest risk a nation would face, it's not from its young people. It's the greatest risk is the consequences of not putting your capital at risk behind them, and then you're going to face much greater risk. I don't think young people are very risky. It's just that we actually think that we've not been prioritizing them. And that's why also here in Nigeria, we have a program, a $614 million program. It's called the Initiative for Digital and Creative Enterprises. Ourselves and other financiers put it together. What will it do? It will support hundreds of small and medium-sized enterprises in the digital and creative industries here in Nigeria, add 6 million jobs to Nigeria, and add $6.4 billion to Nigeria's economy coming out of these young people. Now, of course, how many women do I have in the house today? Yeah, you don't have that much women here. Oh, come on. Okay. You know, no bird can fly with one wing. Every bird flies with two wings. No nation can ever develop without providing economic opportunities for the women of their country. I remember when I went in 1992, I came to Nigeria, and at that time they used to have an airline that used to call Air Afrique. You remember? I came with Air Afrique, and I was sitting with a number of women. And as I tried, I had a computer at the time. Brother Jagada, you know, it's compact. It was an old, that looked like a briefcase. And that's all I had. I entered the plane. I tried to put it in the overhead compartment. There was no space. And I had all these women, market women. They were all there, you know. They were all, please don't misunderstand me. They all are like this, very fat like this. I'm not saying that in the wrong way. You will understand what I'm saying later. And so I was struggling to put my computer somewhere. And the hostess looked at me and said, "Can I help you, sir?" I said, "Yes, I'm trying to find a space." All these women with baskets on their head and things, and everybody. He said, "Sir, how many times do you fly this aircraft, plane?" I said, "Depends." He said, "These women, they fly it twice a day. They may look like illiterates to you, but they literally keep us in business." And all of a sudden, I had tapes. They had wrapped bales of clothing around themselves because the customs were charging them too much. And so they, everybody was not like this. They were actually like this. They packed them in baskets and put them right up. And they were like, you know, mannequin or somebody walking a catwalk. But then that lady told me, "Give me your computer, doctor." And they put my computer in the hold of the plane. And she looked at me and said, "Make more room for the women." When I became president of the African Development Bank, my staff are here, forgot that story. I told myself, why can't these women have access to financing to thrive more? And so I decided to set up something called the Affirmative Finance Action for Women in Africa. I went to President Macron of France, and I sat together in the G7 with world leaders, and I made the case for that. We were able to raise the money. This is what I want to tell you. Last year, the African Development Bank approved. We had approved $2.8 billion for over 28,000 businesses of women in Africa in one in 43 countries with 187 financial institutions. I believe that one day the women should be running the airlines anyway. And, let me also give a public disclosure, because there's nothing I do at home in my work that Grace doesn't know about or have an input into. And so partly I also did it to make sure I have some sanity at home as well. Otherwise, she keeps telling me, you're not doing enough for women. And so I can sleep well because we are already supporting women. Fourth, let me address the challenge of global energy transition and how Africa should better position itself globally. As the world accelerates its efforts towards energy transition with strategic minerals, and you've heard a lot about that these days about countries, Africa will play a critical role. That's because Africa is a major source of these minerals, including cobalt, bauxite, graphite, manganese, and vanadium. The Democratic Republic of Congo alone accounts for 70% of the world's cobalt production and 51% of its reserves. Now, how can we be poor sitting on such assets? Africa must therefore carefully negotiate its engagement in the global geopolitical rush for critical minerals and rare earth metals elements today. Africa can be competitive in these global value chains. It must move away from exporting raw materials and move into processing and value addition to benefit from high returns at the top of the global value chains. Now here, I want to say something about dependency on raw materials. Let me be clear. The door to poverty is the export of raw materials of any kind. The highway to wealth is the additional value to everything that you have. What is the sense of having cocoa? In the market of $120 billion for chocolate, and Africa gets 2%. They don't have cocoa anywhere else. We're the ones that have that. And how can you have all of these resources, but if you are exporting them raw, you have volatility, you have low prices, you are poor. And so we have to make sure we learn lessons from others. In this issue of critical minerals, let me give you some examples. Chile. Which has propelled it today into a significant player with downstream industries, including stainless steel and battery materials. China, today, controls 80% of the global refining capacity of minerals with a combination of policy coordination, infrastructure investment, and export controls to develop its global positioning in the processing of critical minerals. That's why today, China accounts for 75% of global production of polysilicon and 85% of the manufacturing of wafers for making solar panels. And just so that you understand why this is critical, if you are actually making lithium-ion precursor batteries in the Democratic Republic of Congo, it costs 3 times less than if you're doing it in China, Poland, or anywhere else. Right here at home in Nigeria, for manufacturing of solar panels, here is some good news. It actually costs less than actually manufacturing that in China. And therefore, it's important for the Nigerian government to have a clear policy and strategy on mineral industrial manufacturing capacity. To benefit from the global value chains in these critical minerals, Africa must fix 5 things. First, it needs to invest heavily in energy, as this is key for the transformation. And that's why myself and the president of the World Bank, Ajay Banga, we got together and we said, how can we provide access to 300 million people in Africa to electricity? You have 600 million people in Africa without access to electricity, despite all the great work we've been doing. And so we launched that thing called Mission 300. We are trying to do that. And just to give you another context, about why I think the abnormal must never become normal. Sometimes we don't do good policies because we are used to things that are not working. You've been conditioned into accepting abnormality. When I was a graduate student from Nigeria that went to the United States, I was received by a couple, an American couple, who signed up to get students and help them to acclimatize to the United States. And as I came to their home, straight out of Nigeria, from NEPA, you can understand, I took out my suitcase and I took all my clothes out and asked for an ironing board. And I started ironing. I ironed for close to 1 hour in trying to do that. In trying to do that. And then she came to me, thank you. She said, Akin, what are you doing? I said, I am ironing, of course. She said, but you've been ironing for close to 1 hour. I said, you know, because they may take off electricity anytime. And she looked at me in dismay. She said, take away electricity. What does that mean? I said, I mean, it will go off. She says, not in America. That was how I realized I had been conditioned to accept an abnormality as normal. We shouldn't be doing that. And in this summit we had, that I helped to organize, we had over 27 African heads of state. We mobilized $50 billion right there to be able to do that for Africa, because we cannot have a situation where not having electricity is what we are even debating in 2025. And I went to graduate school for my PhD in 1983, you can imagine. And so please, we have to fix that. Second, we must promote critical minerals development with infrastructure policies and regulations. One of my advisors, Professor Oyinka Oyelana, can stand. You know, he also went to IFE. He had a first-class honors in chemical engineering. And he was one of the first that it took to go to Ajaokuta Steel Complex. He told me that he went to India. And when they got there, they trained them. They were better than any of the Indians that were out there. They came back home, no support, no infrastructure. The people were learning from them. And that's why Ajaokuta is still where it is today. So all I want to, Prof, please sit down and thank him for his really great job. You know, all I want to say is that let's have a sense of urgency. Let's not have a situation where the abnormality becomes normal in all parts of what we do. So we must have a way in which we rapidly industrialize. Third, Africa must support mineral-based industrialization. You know, I read something in New York Times just 2 days ago. China produces 33.5 million students, graduates in science, education, mathematics, and engineering a year. 3.5 million. They have 39 universities that are exclusively devoted to critical minerals and rare earth. I'm not talking of it as a specialty or some course. 39 universities fully devoted to that. Where is the university dedicated to minerals and rare earth in Nigeria? We export it to others. They turn it into high-value products, and they send it back to us. This thing should not be continued. Africa must embrace strong corporate governance, transparency, environmental protection, and sound mineral stewardship, including social responsibility, protection of lands and rights of communities. Let me touch on the fifth point. The issue of global dynamics and rising costs of capital for African countries. Now, let me explain myself here. Capital to develop is hard to find. The cost of capital in Africa is 3 to 5 times that of anywhere in the world. And people will tell you that Africa is risky, right? Really? Well, don't believe me. Believe the data. The Moody Analytics did an assessment of cumulative losses when you actually lend your infrastructure. What did they find? They found that cumulative losses for infrastructure in Africa was only 1.9%. 14 years. The cumulative loss that you will have, default risk in North America is 10%. The default risk in Latin America was 12%. The default risk in Eastern Europe was even more than that. West Europe, 4.3%. And yet they tell you that you are a very risky place. How? No, Africa's risks are not being properly priced. Today, the service cost of debt costs Africa, according to United Nations Development Program, $75 billion extra per year, just because of the mispricing of Africa's risks. You know, at my age, I'm 65 now, and I learned to swim just a few years ago. And the reason why I learned to swim was because one of my staff told me, Mr. President, if you ever go on somewhere and there's a problem on the river or whatever, we're going to have a key person risk. So I decided to learn how to swim. And when I learned how to swim, I was told by the coach to, after 3 days, say I can cross the entire pool. I said, you must be out of your mind. My time is a 10-year time. I'm not going to die before my time. But he said I should try. And so I started swimming. I swam. He said, I'm right behind you. If you sink, I'll catch you. And so I continued to swim. And then I almost got to the end. I looked behind me. He wasn't there. And I started thinking, he actually stayed at the end speaking through the water. I'm right behind you. I'm right behind you. And so the point I want to make is this. If you know what you're doing, the deepest end of the pool is the easiest spot to swim. So therefore, if you don't understand Africa, right, don't start sinking. Just learn to understand how to operate in African economies. We are not as risky as people think we are. And so therefore, I think for anybody there that's in business, if you need a coach to help you in investment, I'll be your coach. I'll be right behind you. And that is why at the African Development Bank, we developed the Africa Credit Rating Agency together with the African Union. I have one of my vice presidents, Professor Kevin Turais, because he also led a lot of work in this particular area. And so that the perceived risk happens to be much more than the real risk. And so price us properly so that the cost of capital is going to allow us to be able to develop. And finally, today, I had the opportunity of handing a booklet to the Minister of Finance of the country called Africa Financial Stability Mechanism. Africa, ladies and gentlemen, is the only region of the world that does not have any fiscal buffers if there are shocks. The only region of the world. Now, if you go to a medical doctor, to any hospital, and you have malaria, and they send you straight to an emergency ward, is that what it works? Every time there's a shock in Africa, we're going straight into the emergency financial ward. There is no protection from all these multiple challenges. So we took a decision that we will rescue Africa from that. And we developed what's called the Africa Financial Stability Mechanism, just like they have in Europe, so that when there are shocks, we can refinance our debt ourselves. And so these are some of the institutions that we continue to have that are very important. Sixth, let me address the issue of the rising insecurity that we have in Africa. And you read the details in the paper. We don't have a Marshall Plan for that. We face so many challenges with insecurity. The African Union has what they call silencing the guns. But the number of interstate wars are reducing, but the number of conflicts are rising. But I think it's very important across the Sahel, Professor Jega, you're in charge of livestock. When you look at the challenges of livestock and the conflict between pastoralists and farmers that you find in the Sahel, that you find in Nigeria, that you find everywhere, it is because you have a challenge with isolates that are moving further down. It's a conflict over resources that we have. And we have destroyed many parts of our countries. But there's no Marshall Plan to rebuild those areas. So when you've destroyed all those areas, how are you going to do it? There is no Marshall Plan to do it. I believe that most of the insecurity we have comes out of what I call a disaster triangle. That disaster triangle has three components: extreme rural poverty, structurally high unemployment, especially among young people in rural areas, and climate and environmental degradation. Anywhere you find this, whether it's in northern Nigeria, whether it's in the Sahel, whether it's in the Horn of Africa, you always have conflicts. And therefore, it's not just guns that we need to deal with these things. We need to understand the drivers of fragility, and therefore make sure that we are supporting that. But how can you grow if nations are spending more of their resources on expenditures on security and less on education, health, water, sanitation, and all the things that we care about? There's no fiscal space. That's why, again, the African Development Bank decided to launch what is called security indexed investment bonds. These are new financial instruments that will allow Africa to secure long-term financing on the capital markets to do four things. First, repair damaged infrastructure in areas of conflict. Second, rebuild social infrastructure, water, sanitation, schools, and all of that. Third, build some of your institutional capacity to monitor the fragilities, and then protect areas of strategic investment. Look, you can't go to Saudi Arabia and blow up their oil pipelines. You can't go to Qatar and blow up their gas pipelines. We invested, helped to mobilize $26 billion, $24 billion for Mozambique liquefied natural gas project. They were going to earn $66 billion on that over time. In a few months, terrorists went over there. $66 billion of revenue. No, these things can be. And therefore, what I want to say is that we must make sure that we have vehicles that allow us to rebuild this infrastructure. Because if we don't, Professor Jega, for example, if a terrorist goes to a place and finds people with no employment, find people that are, very, very poor, all they have to do is give them a little bit of money. They'll do whatever. And so we must, in my view, handle this issue with good understanding. Let me say something about addressing global financing for climate. I'll rush through it so I don't keep it too long. But let me just say that Africa is the region of the world most impacted by climate change. 9 out of the 10 most vulnerable countries to climate change in the world are in Africa. We lose $7 to $15 billion a year due to climate change. And yet Africa only gets 3% of global financing for climate change. At the African Development Bank, we understand that dynamics. And that's why we have developed what's called the African Adaptation Acceleration Program. It's a $25 billion program to support Africa to adapt to climate change that we didn't cause. This today, ladies and gentlemen, is the largest climate adaptation program in the entire world, and it's coming out of Africa. We also support countries to insure them against climate risks. Let me go to my 8 points as I come to the end of my lecture. I want to talk about just how we value natural capital. Let me explain myself. Today, if you take a look at the DRC Congo, the Congo Basin is the second largest carbon lungs in the world. But Africa gets absolutely nothing for it. The price of carbon in Europe is 200 euros per ton. The price of carbon in Africa is $3 to $5 per ton. So if you are actually doing development in Europe and you are emitting so much, you need to have, under the European emission control standards, you need to pay money, 200 euros per ton, to compensate for that somewhere else. Well, what do? They don't do that in Europe. You just come to Africa and they offer you $2 and $3 per ton. So Africa, therefore, it's nature rich, but cash poor. And therefore, my chief economist here, we did an assessment that if you were looking at African economies' GDP alone, Africa's GDP will have grown by $66.1 billion when we only account for it in 1 year for carbon sequestration alone. I'm not looking at biodiversity. I'm not looking at several other things, because that means that we are not valuing ourselves. Another trend that has happened is what I call the rush for carbon grab in Africa. What do I mean by carbon grab? You remember in agriculture in the past, people that wanted to do agriculture would go and grab land somewhere and they start doing large farms. It's called a land grab. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we have what's called the largest carbon grab in the world. Africans are offered nothing, and vast areas of their countries are being given away to others in exchange for absolutely nothing. They have been underpaid for the carbon. The carbon that they sequestrate in their economy can no longer be used by them. In other words, you actually lose sovereignty over that. And also, we decided at the African Development Bank, I had a team with my chief economist. I said, God cannot do it in such a way that we are green rich and we are cash poor. If you want to borrow money internationally, that's what they use, the ratio between your debt to your GDP. Now, but if my GDP is wrongly computed, it means the ratio of my debt to my GDP will always be high. Well, I've got carbon, I've got biodiversity, I've got ecosystem services that I'm providing, but it's not counted in my GDP. A GDP is the value of goods and services an economy produces. But it doesn't tell you anything about the externalities of that production, how it is produced, the negative impact on others from your production process, and who is going to internalize those externalities. It tells you absolutely nothing. So Africa has been suffering from this for a long time. And so we decided again to deal with this issue. It is time to value our assets properly. So what did we do? Today, we led a global effort to re-estimate the GDP of Africa based on Africa's natural capital. That means that if your debt to your reindexed GDP goes up, your debt to your reindexed GDP goes down. You have a lot more space to grow. And this, ladies and gentlemen, it's a revolutionary development. And I was glad to have led this effort with my chief economist when we went to the global COP 30 in Azerbaijan. And I'm glad to let you know today that this has now been approved by all the African heads of state. The green GDP of Africa. When you and I go and borrow money, we don't borrow money based on the liquidity we have. We borrow money based on the assets we have. And so when my assets are properly valued, I can actually access that market, that global market. So it's one of the things that we are bringing to the world of this. Now, ninth, let me address the issue that is everywhere today, the recent US global tariffs and its implications for Africa, and how to navigate this complexity. As we meet today, ladies and gentlemen, the world is reeling from the effects of US tariffs. The increase in tariffs by the United States, I want to be very clear, is understandable from a domestic policy perspective, as it drives to correct long-term trade imbalances, with the US experiencing today the largest trade deficit in the world, estimated at over $1 trillion. The focus also by the United States is to reverse its loss of manufacturing industries to other parts of the world, to create jobs and to raise government revenue. However, the US tariffs have sparked global uncertainty and market volatility. Already there are tariff retaliations from leading countries, including China, Canada, and the European Union. The global financial markets have been rattled as stock prices fell across the world, from London to Tokyo, to New York, to Beijing, and to others. I'm especially concerned about what this means for African countries, as 47 out of the 54 countries in Africa have been placed under higher US tariffs. The immediate direct effects of the tariffs on African countries will be significant reduction in exports and foreign exchange availability. This will send other shocks waves right through African economies. Local currencies will weaken on the back of reduced foreign exchange earnings. Inflation will increase as costs of imported goods rise and currencies devalue against the US dollar. The cost of servicing debt as a share of government revenue will rise as expected revenues decline. These global tariffs will also have significant indirect effects on Africa, as its exports to developed countries such as China and others in Europe and Asia, they will buy less goods from Africa, and this will is expected to reduce the amount of official development assistance that will come to us from those economies. Of course, today we have the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act. It's a duty-free access of Africa to the rest of the world. Those things are going to be perfected. But let me just make 3 points so that I don't get too technical on this. The total amount of trade by Africa with the US is only $34 billion. It's very minuscule. If you look at the amount of trade surplus that Africa has with the United States, it's only $7.2 billion. So $7.2 billion out of over $1.2 trillion is absolutely nothing. Africa doesn't have anything really with regard to that. And when you look at Africa's share of exports to the US as a share of exports of others, it's only 1.2%. And so the issue, in my view, is that Africa should not get into a war tariff with the United States. What is needed is more trade with the US. The current dynamics calls for a recalibration of trade and investment between the US and Africa, which will expand trade opportunities, therefore, between the United States and Africa. US has huge opportunities in Africa to invest, from rail to ports, to corridors, to agriculture, to processing, to critical minerals. And I think I would like to encourage that there be openness in dialogue on these tariffs. I asked the Minister of Trade and Finance about that this morning, and that we should prioritize negotiations to make sure that Africa is not underserved in this shifting geopolitically driven economic and investment landscape. Africa should also tariff-proof itself from future shocks. The continent can do that in several ways. It should move to a growth model that focuses on growing its economies through rise in domestic consumption. That will create markets domestically and reduce vulnerabilities. The continent should make the Africa Continental Free Trade Area to work and add value to everything that it produces. I will be very worried for Africa on tariffs when Africa is producing microchips and not potato chips or yam chips. Finally, let me close. I would like to draw some general lessons for Africa in the wake of all of these new global dynamics. First, Africa must overhaul its approach toward achieving fast-paced growth and development. The era of aid and free money is gone. African countries must now learn to develop via the discipline of investment. Countries can no longer rely on aid for growth or count it as part of government revenue, as has been the case for decades. Benevolence is good, but benevolence is not an asset class. Second, more aggressive measures are needed for countries to expand domestic resource mobilization. This needs to go beyond simply increasing taxes. Countries must have stricter and more transparent management and accountability over their vast natural resources, including paying for royalties and taxes. And let me say this: when people pay taxes, it is not the role of government to waste the resources of the people. Yeah, if you want to cap, you can do that. When you pay your taxes, there must be a social contract between the citizens and the government. When you pay taxes and I have to build my roads, I have to provide my electricity, I have to provide my own security, I have to provide my water, dig boreholes everywhere like that. That is an implicit tax that arises from government failure. And so you are essentially, you may say the nominal tax rate is low. Many people make that case in Africa and say, well, the tax to GDP ratio of Africa is low. Well, look, the effective tax rate is very high, because when governments don't do what they're supposed to do, the people have to compensate for government. And therefore, I think Africa pays perhaps one of the highest implicit tax rates in the world. Governments should not abdicate their responsibility. There must be transparency, accountability, and public efficiency in the use of tax resources that people are able to collect. Third, the mindset must shift from aid reliance to developing through trade and investments. We have to improve our overall macroeconomic environments, our business and investment environments, reduce the cost of doing business, assure predictability of the business environment, protect property rights, and assure the rule of law. Fourth, countries will need to build their capacities to structure investments in their critical access to unlock their value. We must make the Africa Continental Free Trade Area work better, produce local, buy local, and trade more locally. And there must be greater value addition to all what Africa produces, from oil to gas to minerals to metals to rare earths to agricultural products. As I close, I have said it earlier, the export of raw material is the door to poverty. The export of value-added products is a highway to wealth. And Africa certainly is tired of being poor. I wish to state that the foundations have been laid for many of these things that I have talked to you about. Today, we have South Africa as the presidency of G20. It's never happened before. The African Union is a member of G20. It's never happened before. The president of the African Development Bank has sit on G7, G20, everywhere to articulate these issues and many more. We never had that place before. It's a different place. Nobody gives you space. You take the space. Now, as I come to the end of my term, I'm grateful for Nigeria for having sent me to the African Development Bank. And it took so many people, leaders for that to happen. It took a president like President Jonathan to nominate me for that, for which I'm eternally grateful. And I remember when I was going to be campaigning, it took another head of state, General Abdul Salam, to tell me the strategy I needed, the places I needed to go to be able to succeed in my campaign. It took a General Abdul Salam to take me to somebody I had never known before and never met before, Vice President Atiku. It took a General Gawan to ride on a plane with me to Namibia to campaign for me there. It took General Obasanjo, Papa Obasanjo, because I'm mentioning general as a general, to support me in campaigning for many of these things. General Babangida. They all supported me. But I want to say something today. If President Buhari had not supported my candidacy, it was dead on arrival. I went campaigning around the world. I got to a particular country. They said, sorry, we can't see you. I said, why? They said, because the government has changed in Nigeria. There's a new president that's coming in. And we don't know whether he's going to support you. And I'd never met President Buhari ever before. I was in Paris. Everybody was running away from me because they don't know whether my candidacy was valid or viable or not. Governor Amoso was governor of my state. Very kind man. I called him, Governor, I have some challenges. He picked the phone, he gave me a number of somebody to call at the villa. I placed that call to Tunde Sabiu, who was working for President Buhari. He took the phone to President Buhari. I had never spoken to him in my life. Mr. President, sir, I'm Nigeria's candidate that is roaming the streets of Paris because nobody knows whether I'm going to be a viable candidate because they said, you are new and maybe they don't know how you're going to support me. He said, when are you coming to Nigeria? I said, immediately you give me an order. I made my way to Nigeria. It was Vice President Atiku that took me to his house. I never met Atiku before. I was meeting him for the first time. I don't know why you're laughing. But, the President Buhari said to me, Dr. Adeshina, I have followed your career without you knowing for a long time. I know you as a person of integrity and professionalism. I will support your candidacy, even though you are PDP. I had great support for Vice President Madi Sambo. Went all over with me. What am I saying? I am not a product of myself. I am a product of trust, support of so many of all our leaders. And as I went to see President Buhari in Kaduna, because we came to launch the special agro-industrial processing zones, I went to him and I said, Mr. President, I came to say thank you. And I said, I need to remind you of what I did when you became president. I came to Nigeria at the time. I was now an ex-minister, former minister. I went to the Eagle Square, where they were having the inauguration on the 29th of May, as I was elected 28th of May, 2015. And as I tried to enter the VIP place, they said, no, you're a former minister. So I went to where the soldiers were outside. I left 81 ministers of finance in Abidjan. I told them, I have to go home and say thank you to all the people who supported me before I can do anything. I arrived in Nigeria. I stood in the sun for 3 hours waiting for my opportunity to say thank you to President Jonathan and President Buhari. There was a soldier guy there who took a newspaper and he put it over my head. I said, no, don't worry. I've never seen a good minister of agriculture that dies from the sun. And as President Jonathan was walking out to go and give his final address, I was there. I moved very closely to the red carpet. Your Excellency, Mr. President, thank you, sir. Without you, we wouldn't have won. He said, congratulations, Akin. I thanked him. He went, he came back, gave a salute, and he was in the car off. Now I had to see President Buhari. How will I do that? Soldiers everywhere, military people everywhere. And so this guy told me, well, President Buhari will be coming right down the days. He will look only to his right, not to his left. And on the right, you had the service chiefs. So which means no-go area. I said to myself, I didn't come from Abidjan to come here, no, without getting what I wanted. I would say thank you. Anyway, so as he was coming down, I moved to the right. I crossed the carpet. The service chief saw me. Congratulations, Dr. Adeshina. I said, sorry, I don't want to disrupt anything. I just came to say thank you to President Buhari. Oh, say go straight to the head of the line, where the late Admiral Bade was there. I told him, he said, stand on my left side. I stood there. President Buhari came and he looked up. I was the first person that he saw. I said, Mr. President, we won. Thank you for your support, for everything. I just came to say thank you because I've got the whole of ministers around the world in Abidjan waiting. But I must say this before I can do anything there. And he said, oh, congratulations. Then, you know, he has a wary sense of humor. He said, for one moment, I thought my chief of defense staff was wearing mufti. And so when I was in Kaduna to tell him all this, we laughed. And I got up and I prostrated for him to say, thank you, sir. And he said, you are a very well brought up man. Why am I saying this? When you are sent on an errand, you have to give account for those who sent you there. It has been the greatest joy of my life to serve my continent, to be given the trust, the resources, the platform, the support, to change and transform the continent of my own birth. This was not a job, this is a mission. When I joined the African Development Bank, thanks to all the work of our shareholders and my staff, the capital of the bank was $93 billion. Today, the capital of the bank is $318 billion. 3 years ago, the African Development Bank was rated as the best multilateral financial institution in the world. And for the last 2 years, the African Development Bank was ranked as the most transparent financial institution in the world. In what they call Publish What You Fund, which measures transparency around the world, last year the bank scored 98.9%, which is the highest ever in the history of that index in the world. I told you about the African Development Fund. The concessional arm of the bank was ranked the second best concessional financing institution in the world, above all 55 bilateral institutions in all 55 OECD countries. That has been the journey. I want to say today I am proud of what I am leaving behind. But more than anything else, as I stand here today, I could not have been where I am and do what I've done by the special grace of God without this woman sitting right there. My love, can you stand? Please help me. Africa must chart its future, relying not on benevolence of others, but on its own self-determination of self-reliance, building reliable alliances, leveraging opportunities in this global dynamics while putting Africa first. Only then will Africa be great again. And let's make that happen. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you so much, sir. That was huge, huge. Thank you, Your Excellency. Yes, let's sit down, please. Let's take our seats, please. Before I invite the chairman of the Convocation lecture for his closing remarks, I need to quickly introduce some vice chancellors that are here. We have the presence of the Vice Chancellor Joseph Sarwan Tafa University, Makurdi, being represented by Professor Dr. Musa James. Professor James, thank you. We are welcome. We have Barrister Omure. Barrister Omure, thank you. We have the Vice Chancellor, UNIMATE, the University of Maiduguri, being represented by Professor M. Mele. Thank you. We have Professor Nusanu Afodio, Vice Chancellor, Anna University, Core, Plateau State. Next is Associate Professor Kingsley C. Okafor, the Director of Academic Planning, Bingham University, representing the VC Bingham University, Cairo. You are welcome. We have Sir Joseph Epe Edet, Vice Chancellor at Sir Jarvis University, Calabar. You are welcome. We have Dauda M. Adedayo, Associate Professor and DVC Academic, representing Lagos State University of Education, last word. Okay. We have Professor Sonia Amel Yauta, Acting Vice Chancellor, Gobi State University. You are welcome. We have Dr. Biok Muftal, representing the Chief Medical Director, Federal Medical Center here in Abuja. You are welcome. And we have Mr. Habib Ekalefo, Registrar, Edo State University, Yamo, representing the VC Edo State University. You are welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor to invite the chairman of this lecture, Professor Ataru Jega, OFR, for his closing remarks. Professor.
Our host, the Vice Chancellor, the guest speaker, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. What more is there to be said? I have told you at the beginning that a convocation lecture is supposed to be thought-provoking, to be inspiring, and we have had all of that. And I believe that we are all satisfied with the delivery, with the brilliance, and with the cogent advocacy contained in the discussions and the recommendations made by the guest speaker. I think the only thing to add is to thank him most sincerely for sparing time to be here with us, to share his experiences and his ideas with us, and to enrich us in terms of understanding the efforts that have gone into trying to reposition Africa in global development in spite of all the challenges associated with the dynamics of geopolitics. And now we appreciate even more the particular role he and his colleagues at the ADB have played in order to ensure that Africa explores its potential, benefits from that potential, and actually pursues a path of self-sustaining development. We cannot but thank you most sincerely for that. You have been our Nigerian ambassador. You have been our Nigerian, I won't say export, but you have certainly represented us very, very well. Only God Almighty will reward you appropriately for this role. I think, to my mind, everything that he has said is something for reflection in terms of how do we as individuals or in collectives participate in this struggle to free Africa, to ensure that Africa pursues an independent course for its development, reduces dependence on aid, and actually taps the enormous potentials that our young men and women represent. And if we reflect more on this, I think we come back to the elephant in the room, the role of leadership at the national level and virtually at the continental level and at all levels of engagement for human self-sustaining development, especially in our continent. There is no time to begin to discuss that issue again, but it is critical. We need leaders that are visionary, that are selfless, and that can really pursue an independent course in terms of addressing the fundamental needs and aspirations of our people, particularly in a very turbulent, in a turbulent world where virtually all the stats, are negatively confronting us. So it's very, very important that at the national level, at the continental level, we pay serious attention to the kind of leaders we need that can actually help us transcend the challenges, tap our potentials, and ensure that Africa is well positioned in the global economy. Dr. Adesina, my dear brother, I want to end by saying that as you leave the African Development Bank, and it's still several months before that happens, God Almighty reward you appropriately for all that you have done. And I can assure you God will also open other opportunities for better roles for our country and for our continent. God bless you, and God bless you all. Thank you.
The Vice Chancellor, sir, may I invite you to present the university's plaque to the convocation lecturer. We want to make some presentations now.
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I am an extremely happy person today. Last year, if you permit me, we had a convocation lecturer who came from Tanzania. This time we have a convocation lecturer who is from Abidjan. And we've been really, truly inspired by this. We really want to recognize the immense industry that the president of the African Development Bank and our 2025 convocation lecturer has put in to make us all very enjoyable for this. May I invite the Pro-Chancellor of the National Open University of Nigeria to kindly please come forward and present our plaque to the guest lecturer, Malam Issa Yuguda. Read what is written there. Yes. May I invite the guest lecturer, Dr. Akim Shino, and his lovely wife, Mrs. Grace Oluwayemisi Adeshino, to come forward, please.
With gratitude to the Almighty God, I stand here to take this rare privilege to hand over this plaque to my very good brother, very good friend, and also a colleague in government in the villa for a number of years. We thank God for you. We thank your parents that gave birth to you. We thank your dear wife that stood by you to be what you are today. We also thank the university that graduated you, University of Ife, and all the other universities that molded you to who you are today. And for some of us that have known you, at least we know that if we are headhunting for the best in Nigeria, best in Africa, and including, of course, best in the world. And I'm not saying it for joke, because I had the experience of interactions. I've interacted with the African Development Bank at the infancy. I've interacted with Afrexim Bank in Cairo when it was set up. The first MD was Mr. Edodu from Edo State in Cairo. I've interacted with the World Bank, the MIGAs, the IMFs, European Development Banks, and what have you, including, of course, China Exim Bank, where me and you at the point in time went to defend our borrowings. But I'm assuring you, sir, not because you are my brother, not because you are my friend, but I always say it as it is. I consider you the best in the world, to be honest with you. I'm very honest. I'm very emotional about it. because I know your track record. And I made a point of duty that anytime you deliver a lecture anywhere in the world, I must get a copy and read. So don't say that because we've parted, I'm not keeping track of what you are doing. We are most grateful that we had you here today. And any person that must have listened to you, he knows that we have a problem, but we have those who can provide a solution. Not provide the solution with very long timelines, no. With leapfrogging and making our country great. And I think you are one of them. We thank you for this inspiring lecture, thought-provoking lecture, and I hope and pray this audience, we are gathered here, we are many in numbers. Please let us go back with his sermons in mind that we need to make Nigeria great. We need to make Africa great. So in this regard, I must thank you most sincerely, and I must thank my Vice Chancellor for being able to reach out to you in Abidjan to bring you to this occasion and to honor us with this knowledge that you've given us. So Vice Chancellor, we thank you very much. So this is a plaque as a mark of appreciation by the university. And it reads as follows. The 14th Convocation of the National Open University of Nigeria. This plaque is proudly presented to Dr. Akinwumi A. Adesina, Commander of the Order of the Niger, President and Chairman, African Development Bank Group. With profound appreciation for your insightful and stimulating convocation lecture and in recognition of your visionary leadership, groundbreaking economic initiatives, and unwavering commitment to Africa's development. With deep administration and respect of the Chancellor, Governing Council, management, Senate, staff, and students of the National Open University of Nigeria, we thank you most sincerely, Professor Olufemi A. Peters, Vice Chancellor. So, on behalf of the university, and I believe this plaque is not only for including Madam. So congratulations, Madam. And I look forward to seeing you more of you. Thank you, Madam, for coming. Thank you very much. We really appreciate it. Yes. Okay. Okay. Thank you. This is yet another single gift from our Vice Chancellor. Okay. And small as it may be, it's symbolic. It means a lot to us and to you also. Thank you, brother. We appreciate you, my brother. Thank you very much. And as you go back, we wish you the safest of safe journeys together with Madam and meet your family very well. But for some of us, well, my age and your age is, the gap is just about 2 years, just slightly 2 years older than you. But I will keep remembering you for the rest of my life. And we pray that you'll come back to contribute to that country and Africa and the entire world indeed. If there was a presidency for Africa, my brother, I'm sentimental, I'm emotional. It would have been my best. Thank you very much. Thank you so very much. So much. Excellency. Madam, thank you so very much. Thank you. Thank you. Good picture. Okay. Thank you. That's the privilege. Because I have a sister. Okay, I did not come. Oreto.
Thank you very much, sir, Dr. Akinwumi Adesina. We also have a present to also present to the chair of the occasion, Professor Atahiru Jaga, OFR. May I please invite him to chair? And I have invited the immediate past Vice Chancellor, Professor Abdallah Uba Adamu, to do the needful.
I am originally from Niger Republic, so I could say it in Hausa language because my country has declared Hausa as a mother tongue. But then I remember I'm in Nigeria, and Nigeria uses English as its official language. So, sir, what this lovely flag, gold colored, said, in appreciation of your outstanding role as chairman of the 14th Convocation Lecture of the National Open University of Nigeria, NOUN, and in recognition of your distinguished contributions to academic and national development. And nobody can attest to this than myself, because he was my vice chancellor in Bayero University, Kano. On behalf of the Chancellor, Governance Council, Senate, management, staff, and students of NOUN, with profound gratitude and best wishes, Professor Oga Olupemi A. Peters.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yes. Now this is this is from the Vice Chancellor.
The box.
Yes. Courtesy of Vice Chancellor.
In a PA Dinka. So,
You have to say something.
oh, so there's another thing. Okay. So, good evening, actually. Well, there's nothing to read here, but I think we can turn it around so that people can see.
Just a special gift for courtesy.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Yes. Thank you. We'll announce it.
Yes. Okay, sir.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, sir. Okay.
May I have your ears, please? Just before we go to that, I had introduced the Minister of Youth Development as a representation earlier on. It was a slip, and it's actually himself, the Minister for Youth Development, Mr. Ayo Olawande. And really, he's a youth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Please go to the last page on the program. That's immediately after this lecture ends. The convocation lecturer and all the invited guests will file out to decide for the turning of the sword of the foundation laying ceremony on the Regional Training Institute for Open Distance Learning building. It's just a stone throw from this place. Immediately after the lecturer, our guest speaker, and all invited girls, we just file out to that place for the foundation laying ceremony of the Regional building. Thank you. Please, I learned somebody from Philomath University. We are well recognized, sir. The Vice Chancellor of Philomath University, we appreciate you. Thank you for coming, please. Mr. Vice Chancellor, sir, may I invite you to declare the 14th convocation lecture closed. Sorry, I've just been told that the former Vice Chancellor has not been introduced. Professor Vincent Adotinebe. Yes.
Before I close, when we had start the way, it's my also pleasure to introduce to the House a former Vice Chancellor of this university who actually constructed this university and on whose name the Senate building of our university is named, Professor Vincent Ado Tenebe. You are welcome. It is therefore my honor and privilege on behalf of the National Open University of Nigeria to declare the 14th convocation lecture closed. Thank you very much. National anthem, please.
National anthem. Has brought us to the end of the 14th convocation lecture of the National Open University of Nigeria. We want to please ask you remain standing as the Vice Chancellor's procession takes its leave from this auditorium in reverse order. This is bringing to the notice of all Senate members that they are expected to be at the library as usual reception. Now, we follow up the things of educational training and such institute for distancing. I much by other addition. This is just a slice of what to expect. The convocation is here the headquarters, precisely at the convocation arena. And it really starts by a time no more fighting.
If the world was ending, I want to be the truth. If the party was over and be next to you. Wanna be next to you. Yeah, when you start up the budget, 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 kissy face, fancy phone, I'm trying to kiss your lips for real. Hearts, red hearts, that's what's mine, yeah. Come give me something I can feel. So go on, baby. Don't